Yesterday we spoke about men, women are obligated in reciting Birchas Hamazon, in reciting grace after meals. What about children? So children under the age of bar and bat mitzvah, obviously the minute a child becomes bar or bat mitzvah, then he's not a child anymore with regards to the halacha, he's considered to be an adult. And but children under bar and bat mitzvah are obligated to bench, right? And that's from the rabbis. It's a din of what's called chinuch, a din of training them to do the mitzvahs, education, and it's important actually that they be taught how to bench. It's interesting, you know, that there's a custom amongst most boys that before they reach their bar mitzvah, but maybe like a month before they reach their bar mitzvah, they start putting on the tefillin, and the reason for that is also to get themselves ready, to get themselves used to it. And then once they become completely obligated, then at that point they're used to putting them on, and they feel a little less uncomfortable because wearing tefillin at the beginning is definitely a little bit difficult. Okay, what about smaller children than that? So children that have reached the age of chinuch, of education. So we're talking about 6, 7, 8. What about less than that? So smaller children, for sure, you can teach them to recite some of Birchas Hamazon. So sometimes they'll just recite the first paragraph, the first bracha over there, and that way they'll learn the whole thing. Interestingly enough, with regards to teaching children, it's permitted to use the name of God, even though under normal circumstances, even if you're not benching, for example. So your child had lunch and he had a sandwich and you want to teach him how to bench, so it's permissible for you to use the name of God whilst teaching them how to bench, because that's part of the educational process, the same way that it's permissible to teach them how to make brachas. Right? So for example, somebody who's teaching in a kindergarten, I don't know if they recite brachas in kindergarten, but maybe whatever age it is that they start, a person who's already davened in the morning, they've already prayed, and they come in and then they pray together with the kids, so they're going to have to repeat the brachas over again. That's okay, right? Because it's all being done for educational reasons. It is true that some poskim, some authorities are of the opinion that children should be taught a slightly abridged version of Birkat Hamazon, but in general, most of the authorities say that it's okay to teach children how to bench, even if they're not going to do the whole thing. How are we supposed to regard benching, right? What's our relationship with benching supposed to be? So according to the halacha, it's interesting, we're supposed to regard benching as if we're davening the Amidah, as if we're davening the Shmoneh Esrei, which means that we're not allowed to make any breaks in between. You should not allowed to talk, not allowed to make any interruptions. You should avoid stopping at any point during benching unless you're waiting for the person who's leading the benching to say the bracha so that you can answer Amen. Right? But aside from that, you should avoid making any kind of breaks in between. Again, it's a problem. If you do, it's a problem. And the shayla about whether somebody has to go back, but the eved, he is fulfilled his obligation if he doesn't go back and he just recites the whole thing from where he left off. But it's something to be very careful about. Another thing that you should know when you're coming to bench is that you should not have anything in your hands, right? So except for a bencher, right? Which means you shouldn't play around with sometimes there's like cutlery left on the table, silverware left on the table, bits and pieces, right? You shouldn't be doing any of that, and you shouldn't be messing around with somebody who's sitting opposite you, with somebody who's next to you. There's a concept in the halacha called hesach adat, or hesach adas. Hesach adas is that you're supposed to have your mind on what's going on the whole time. This is particularly applicable with things like when you wash your hands for hamoitzi, and now you're waiting for somebody to make hamoitzi. So over there, you're not supposed to be having, a silent conversation with the person opposite you. You're not supposed to be pulling faces. You're not supposed to be making people laugh. You should just be waiting for the bracha to be recited. The same is true during Birchas Hamazon. Of course, it doesn't need to be said. You're in the middle of doing something which is holy, and you're supposed to be taking it seriously. So serious is Birchas Hamazon that according to some authorities, you shouldn't even answer to other things that are being recited at the same time. So let's say, for example, a person's eating lunch, and it just so happens that where they're eating lunch, somebody organizes a minyan for mincha. and now they're davening mincha, and they recite the kedusha or they recite kaddish. According to some opinions, if you're in the middle of benching, if you're in the middle of birkat hamazon, then you should not recite what everyone else is saying. You should just carry on with your own recitation. That's how important it is. Other opinions are not like that, but nevertheless, the very fact that there is an opinion like that indicates just how seriously we're supposed to take birkas hamazon. Okay, what do you do if you stopped benching because you had to go to the bathroom? That's a different kind of an interruption over here, which means it's an interruption which a person's gone to a place which is halachically unclean. The bathroom is considered to be an unclean place, and therefore the bracha needs to be repeated. According to most of the authorities, the bracha needs to be repeated. Okay, here's an interesting idea, very radical. I'm not sure how seriously you should take this, but birkas hamazon should be recited with kavanah. Right? A person should have intent, they should be serious about it, you should concentrate, your words should be said slowly and clearly. It's best to read through it perhaps once or twice in English to understand what it is that you're saying, to have a better kavanah. And it's interesting that it's also, according to most authorities, it's better to recite birkat hamazon from a siddur or from a bencher, from some kind of something that you're reading, rather than to recite it off by heart. Birkat hamazon is a segula. It's a good omen for wealth, which means that when a person recites birkat hamazon the way that they're supposed to, hopefully it's going to help that person to receive some kind of wealth, to be successful in his material life. And if that's the case, it's really something that we should take pretty seriously. You know, people run around all over the place trying to get sugulot, to get brachot from all kinds of people and from all kinds of places, when really all they have to do is just recite birkas hamazon carefully, with kavanah, slowly, enunciating each word the way that you're supposed to, and hopefully that's going to help. Here's an interesting halacha over here. It's not the way that the Mishnah Berurah rules, but other poskim certainly do. Shulchan Aruch HaRav, the Aruch HaShulchan, they rule that if a person benches without kavanah, without intent, without concentration, then even b'di'eved, it's not good. Their benching is no good. And they've got to go back and they've got to bench again. Now again, we don't paskin like that. We follow the ruling of the Mishnah Berurah, who doesn't rule like that. But the very fact that you've got authorities who are saying these things is an indication that we really need to have to take them carefully. Now, you have to understand, it is conceivable. Length has got nothing to do with kavanah. The amount of time you spend doing something, right? So, for example, you can have somebody who spends, 20 minutes praying the Amidah, but he may not. His mind might be, drifting off all over the place. I remember one of the funniest skits that ever took place over here on Purim in the yeshiva was they had this guy came. In the olden days, you had to, what was called a boom box in those days, a great big recorder. He stuck it on the table and he presses the tape, and what you're hearing is a monologue of what he's thinking whilst he's praying, right? So you're hearing, the first thing you hear is that he, bows down really low and bangs his head on the table, and the first thing you hear is ouch. Right, and then from then on, it's like a 10-minute monologue about what's going on, and he looks and sees the person next to him hasn't reached where he's reached, and I better slow down because I'm firmer than he is. And it's like, the whole thing is like, it was really, really, really clever actually. And at the end, it takes us 3 steps backwards, and 1, 2, 3, left, right, middle. He says, I feel great. He says, now if only I could learn how to say the words. Yeah. So it's like length of time has got nothing to do with how much kavanah you've got. Very often, for a lot of people, the more time you spend on something, the greater is your chance that your mind is just going to wander off into who knows which direction. However, kavanah, concentration, is that you understand and you know what it is that you're saying, and that's something which everybody has to do. They say in the Mir, Yeshivas Mir, the late Rosh Yeshiva of the Mir, of Chaim Shmulevitz, so they say that most yeshivas, the yeshiva waits for the Rosh Yeshiva to finish before they begin the recitation of the repetition of the Amidah. In the Mir, the Rosh Yeshiva waited for everybody else. He davened very quickly. And when they asked him why that was, he explained that his mind was so consumed with his learning that if he spent more time than he did davening, his mind would drift back onto the page of Gemara that he was learning, and that wasn't good. And he said he preferred to daven with more, with proper concentration for a more concentrated amount of time than to allow that to happen. So somebody who sits down and says, I just got to bench quickly, wait a minute, and then starts, mumbling something quick as can be, there is a chance that he's doing it okay. There really is. Chances are not, though, right? The real chance is that he's just gabbling things off. He hasn't got a clue what he's saying, and he's not saying his words correctly. He's not saying them properly. And again, here we see it. It's a problem. If you don't know the whole thing, so you should recite whatever you do know. If you've got something in front of you with English in it, for example, so you could recite some of it in Hebrew and some of it in English. It's permissible to recite the whole of Birkat Hamazon in English if somebody's not up to saying it in Hebrew right now. The Mishnah Brura does say, not in regards to benching, but with regards to davening in general, that Lashon HaKodesh, the language that the prayers are written in, Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh, biblical Hebrew, the language that the prayers are written in, is something which has got an incredible innate holiness to it. And if somebody is able to speak Hebrew, if they're able to read Hebrew, even if they don't understand very well what they're saying, they should still pray in Hebrew rather than in the language that they're familiar with. What I always suggest is like this. I think that people who are ready to start praying in Hebrew, they're ready to start practicing and praying in Hebrew, I think it's a very good idea to pray, practice a little bit, start praying in Hebrew, and take off maybe a few minutes each day, not more than that, just a few minutes each day to look into what it is that you're saying, so you'll be able to pick up the intent as well as you're saying it. I'm a big fan, for example, the Art Scroll Siddur. I think it's very, very well formatted, right? So when you come to Daven the Amida, for example, it tells you exactly what the paragraph is all about before you begin it. So, at least you're aware of what it is that you're praying for, even if you're not completely aware of every single word, what that might mean, but the concept of what you're praying for is there. I think it's kind of important. Another thing that's a good idea, the Mishnah Brura says that a person should recite benching out loud. Birkat Hamazon, right? Grace after meals, you should recite it out loud because that brings better kavanah, right? It makes a person concentrate better. And when you say something out loud, you're thinking more about what you're saying than if you just say it, without actually saying the words. It's also good if you say it out loud. The Mishnah Brura says that way hopefully you won't miss out bits and pieces, or if other people are listening, so they'll remind you. For example, we just went through Rosh Chodesh, right? So sometimes people may forget to say Ya'aleh V'yovo. If somebody hears you benching and they hear that you're about to miss it out, so they'll tell you, Ya'aleh V'yovo, and you'll go back and you'll recite Ya'aleh V'yovo the way that you're supposed to, in the place that you're supposed to. The same is true for Shabbos, same is true for Yom Tov, right? All of these things. So it's a good idea to recite out loud. Here's an interesting halacha over here, that you should sit when you bench. The halacha is like this. Interestingly enough, you should sit when you bench, even if you ate standing up. Right, now that's a big chiddush over here, because normally, I understand if you sat down when you ate, so I understand why you should sit down when you bench, right? That makes sense, right? But if you were walking around, you stood up whilst you were eating, and now when you come to bench, you need to sit down. Why is that? Because the answer is very simple, that walking around and benching with kavanah, with intent, don't go together with each other. They just don't. Which means you've got to sit down. It's a lot easier to concentrate on something when you're sitting down than it is when you're wandering around. Yeah, preferably. You should sit down where you ate. At best, you should sit down where you can see where you ate. Okay. So let's say, for example, I don't know, let's say you went to a wedding, right? And you washed and you sat down and you ate, and then you got up to dance, and by the time you come back, somebody's taken, that whole table's now, being taken by other people. So the best thing to do is to sit in a place where you can see where you ate. Okay. Right? And then bench over there, rather than, if you can't, you're going to yank the guy out of there anyway. You're not going to eat the schnitzel after he started eating what you left behind. So, right? That's a good thing to do. What do you do if you're traveling? So it's an interesting thing with traveling, because when you travel, you are not in the same place you were when you started. Hopefully, unless you're on the M1. right? And then the chances are you probably haven't moved anywhere, right? One of the highways in London, in England, where it's always backed up. You get on a train, right, and you're going from one place to another place. You get on the bus and you're going from one place to another place. So your place is considered to be where you're sitting.
No, I mean walking.
Walking. Oh, interesting problem. So what do you do when you're walking? You've now moved further away and you can't see where you were. So you should just sit down where you were, but you sit down where you get to and bench over there, even though you can't see where it was that you originally started eating your meal from, right? Your sandwich, whatever it was. Loi plug means that we don't make exceptions.
Okay, no divisions.
Right, no divisions, right? So you've got a halacha. That was very good, actually. Well done. The halacha is that you're supposed to bench sitting down because the majority of people cannot have kavanah when they're walking around. It's not good for them, right? What about me? Me, if I walk around, then I do have kavanah. The halacha is that you're supposed to follow the majority. Right? So a person should sit down and a person should bench over there even though he's moved further along because he's been walking. Sitting in some kind of a vehicle is a lot less complicated because where you're sitting is considered to be the place that you're eating, even though that place is no longer where it was. Right? So again, you get on the train at one place and a couple of hours later you're getting off somewhere else, but in the meantime you can bench on the way because you're sitting in the same place as you ate. If a person did walk around whilst they were benching, so b'di'eved, they fulfilled their obligation. Now we need to understand that the lechatchila and b'di'eved over here, b'di'eved, right? Which is these are two very important concepts inside of halacha. Lechatchila means that you've done something in the best possible way, right? So for example, the halacha says that you need to sit down when you bench. So I sit down and I bench and I say it out loud and I say it from a siddur and I've done everything that I was supposed to do. But the eved means that I benched standing up. I benched walking around. Is my benching okay now? So in a certain way, it's not always applicable, but in a certain way, but the eved is like de facto. After having done it, is it okay to do it? Which means you go to the rabbi and you say to him, can I walk around when I'm benching? He'll say no. Go to the rabbi and say, I walked around whilst I was benching. What now? And he'll tell you that, but the eved, you fulfilled your obligation, right? You don't have to go back and bench again. I don't know if it's a minimum. I guess so. In a certain way, it's a minimum halacha, but it's fulfilling the mitzvah not in the best possible way, but you're fulfilling it. You know what? You've done the minimum requirement in order to get through what needs to be done. Just one last thing over here about walking around, which is very interesting, actually, I think anyway, halachically. If you need to walk, because if you sit down to bench, you're going to be late for something. So let's say you've got a meeting that you've got to get to, or somewhere that you've got to be, you've got to catch a train, whatever it is, right? If by sitting down and benching, it's going to cause you to be late, so then even lechatchila, it's okay to bench whilst you're on the move, right? Whilst you're walking. Again, halachically, I think it's very novel. It's a very novel idea. If a person you've got to be somewhere, and if you sit down and bench, it's going to cause you to be late. So even lechatchila, it's okay for you to bench whilst you're moving, whilst you're walking, right? So what did we learn? We learned before that really you have to sit down and you have to bench, right? Okay, here, good. If you've got a meeting with somebody at 3 p.m., a friend, and it really doesn't make very much difference if you turn up at 3:10, then fine, for sure, sit down and bench. Okay. If you're going to miss your train or your plane or mincha, right, then no, keep walking and bench whilst you're walking in order to be able to get to where you need to get to. You've got an important business meeting, you've got an important interview to get a job, right? If you sit down and you can't come to these things late, even though they'll keep you waiting over there, right? But you can't turn up late. The thing over here is like this, that inside of halacha, we have to have definitive times and figures in order to be able to do things properly, right? So the person needs to know how long has he got inside of to be able to bench. The original obligation for benching was the first 3 brachot are min Torah. That's a Torah obligation to recite them, and after that, anyone could say whatever. You could say whatever you wanted, which means that look, if it was up to me, which for some reason it's not, Birkat HaMazon would be an awful lot shorter than it is today, that's for sure.
It's really long.
Right? So, what is the function of Birkat HaMazon? So most people say the function of Birkat HaMazon, of course, is to say thank you for what you've eaten. Right? So if it was up to me, it would just be, thanks very much, that was great, I'll see you next time. But for some reason, if you take a look, if you've got any idea what it is that you're saying over there, there doesn't seem to be very much connection. After the first blessing takes care of everything. God gave us, we ate, it's good, right? But after that, we start talking about Bris Milah, we start talking about the land of Israel, we start talking about the Davidic dynasty, we start talking about rebuilding Yerushalayim. I mean, all you did was have a lousy sandwich, right? And the next thing you know, you're like sitting down over here, and it's taking you longer to bench than it did to eat the thing to begin with. Which means like this, the first three brachas are min Torah. The last bracha, which was added in by Ezra Sofer, which is the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, talking about the destruction of the temple, and that was added in later on, after the destruction. Ezra added it in, Atova Meitiv, and it needs to be recited, right, until the Beis HaMikdash is going to be rebuilt. Emit Hashem, as soon as the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt, we won't have to recite that particular bracha over there, right? We won't have to say that. The rest of benching, now I don't know exactly at which point it was added in, but all of the bits after Al Yichasreinu, talking about all the harachamans that come after that. Now I don't know, I really don't know historically at what moment all of these things were put in. Obviously at some point after the Gaonim, what are we going back? I don't know. Perhaps we're going back. It's hard to say. Maybe 1,500 years, maybe to get into the period of when it was first started to be recited. What is interesting is that it was accepted by everybody, which means that as far as I know, all of the different nuschaot, all of the different various ways of benching according to different communities, all include the bits that were added in afterwards. What is interesting, just as a practical halachic dimension, is that all of the harachamans which are recited are requests, right? So according to the Vilna Gaon, you shouldn't recite them on Shabbat. We don't ask for personal requests on Shabbat. Shabbat is a day that's dedicated to Hashem, and we're giving to Hashem, and not the other way around. And that's why you may find that but you may find there are people that you go to for Shabbat where they finish benching after the last bracha of Al Yichasreinu.